I spent 15 years chasing the life I thought I wanted, until one quiet morning in my Chicago apartment made me realize the dream I reached no longer felt like mine. The skyline outside my window looked exactly the way I used to picture it when I was 22. Steel and glass catching the early sun, clean lines, a quiet hum of traffic below. I used to think that view meant success, proof that I had done everything right. Now it just looked unfamiliar. My name is Andrew Collins. I am 37 years old. 10 years ago, if you had shown me this apartment, this city, this version of my life, I would have felt like I was looking at the finish line. I would have felt proud, relieved, maybe even invincible. Back then, the dream was simple. I would move to Chicago. I would work in finance. I would climb steadily, earn well, buy a high-rise condo with floor-to-ceiling windows, wear tailored suits, and finally feel like I had outrun the small town I grew up in. I would be the guy who made it out. I can still see myself at 22, sitting on the hood of my rusted Honda in my parents' driveway in southern Ohio, staring up at a sky that felt too wide and too empty. I remember thinking that if I did not leave, I would shrink. That staying meant settling, and settling meant disappearing. The dream was not about money at first. It was about distance. Distance from my father's hardware store. Distance from the familiar faces that had known me since kindergarten. Distance from the quiet expectation that I would take over something I never wanted. Chicago represented something sharper, faster, a place where no one knew who I had been in high school, a place where I could build myself from scratch. I built a whole future in my head during my last year of college. I imagined the neighborhood, the coffee shop I would visit every morning, the kind of watch I would wear. I pictured myself confident, decisive, respected. That vision guided everything. I chose internships that looked impressive instead of interesting. I skipped a semester abroad because it did not fit the plan. I dated a girl named Melissa who talked about stability and networking events and long-term strategy. We both liked the same version of success. It felt efficient. I told myself efficiency was maturity. When I got the offer from a firm in Chicago right after graduation, I did not hesitate. I packed everything I owned into the back of that same Honda and drove north with a feeling I can only describe as clean ambition. It felt pure, focused. I remember crossing into Illinois, heart pounding, thinking, this is it. This is the beginning of the life I have been aiming at for years. And for a long time, it felt exactly that way. The first apartment was small and loud, nowhere near the skyline view I have now. But I did not care. I worked late. I learned fast. I said yes to everything. I watched the older guys in the office and studied how they moved, how they spoke in meetings, how they carried themselves. I built myself around the dream. Every promotion felt like confirmation that I was becoming the man I had imagined. Every raise felt like proof that leaving had been the right choice. When I finally moved into this condo 3 years ago, signing the papers with hands that barely shook, I felt something close to triumph. I had arrived. At least, that is what I told myself. But standing in that kitchen this morning, coffee growing cold in my hand, I could not shake the feeling that something was off. Not broken, not tragic, just misaligned. Like I had reached a destination that no longer matched the map inside me. I tried to brush it off, told myself it was stress, burnout, a passing mood. I had a meeting in an hour, a team relying on me, deadlines, targets, the kind of responsibilities I once craved. Still, I kept staring out that window. And for the first time, instead of feeling proud of the view, I felt like I was looking at a life someone else had designed for me. I did not know it yet, but that quiet discomfort was the first crack. And once I noticed it, I could not unsee it. When I think about my early 20s, I remember how clear everything felt. There was no confusion, no second guessing, just a straight line between where I was and where I planned to be. I used to sit at a chipped wooden desk in my college apartment with a legal pad, mapping out my future like it was a business strategy. 5-year plan, 10-year milestones, income goals written in neat columns. I broke my life down into measurable steps. Promotion by 26. Senior position by 30. Property owner before 35. It felt responsible, mature, controlled. I told myself that clarity was strength. Most of my friends were drifting a little after graduation. Some talked about traveling. A few moved back home to figure things out. I could not relate to that. The idea of uncertainty made my skin itch. I wanted structure. I wanted momentum. I remember turning down a job offer in Denver because it sounded too relaxed. Flexible hours. Creative environment. It paid less, sure, but it also sounded interesting. Still, I chose the Chicago firm instead. It was sharper, more competitive. It looked better on paper. Back then, looking better felt like the same thing as being better. I worked weekends without complaint. I volunteered for the projects no one else wanted. I started waking up at 5 in the morning to read financial reports before heading into the office. I remember standing in the bathroom of that tiny first apartment, tying my tie in the mirror, repeating the same thought in my head. This is what serious people do. There was something almost addictive about the grind. The long hours. The quiet pride of being exhausted for a reason. When older colleagues complimented my discipline, I carried that home with me like a trophy. Even my relationships fit the plan. Melissa and I talked about neighborhoods with good resale value. We discussed retirement accounts before we discussed vacations. It felt stable, predictable, like two people building toward the same clean horizon. I thought that was love. Looking back, I can see how tightly I held onto that vision of success. It guided everything. It filtered out distractions. It made hard choices feel simple. If something did not serve the dream, I let it go. And for a long time, that focus felt like purpose. What I did not realize then was that the dream was built by a version of me who was still afraid of being ordinary. And fear can build very convincing blueprints. The first signs were small enough to ignore. That is the tricky part. Nothing dramatic happened. No explosion. No public breakdown in the middle of a meeting. Just little moments that did not sit right. I remember one evening about 5 years into my career. I had just closed a deal that kept me in the office until almost 10 at night. The kind of win I used to fantasize about. The kind of thing that meant I was moving up. I walked out of the building into cold air, tie loosened, phone buzzing with congratulatory messages. I expected to feel proud, energized. Instead, I felt tired in a way that sleep could not fix. Not exhausted from work. Not physically drained. Just hollow. I brushed it off. Told myself it was normal. Everyone gets tired. Everyone questions things sometimes. That is just adulthood. But those moments kept stacking up. There was the weekend I flew back to Ohio for my mother's birthday. I had not been home in almost a year. I kept telling myself I was busy, that travel was inconvenient. The truth was, I liked the distance. That weekend, I ran into an old friend at a diner. His name was Kyle. He never left town. He worked as a high school history teacher. Drove the same pickup he had in college. 10 years ago, I would have felt sorry for him. But sitting across from him in that booth, listening to him talk about his students and the little house he had renovated himself, I noticed something unsettling. He looked content. Not flashy. Not impressive. Just steady. When he asked me about Chicago, about my job, I gave him the polished version. The promotions. The condo. The hours. He nodded, said it sounded intense. Then he asked, "You happy?" The question landed harder than I expected. I answered automatically. Of course. Things are going great. But on the flight back to Chicago, staring out at the clouds, that question kept replaying in my head. Was I happy? Or was I just on schedule? That was the first time I felt the gap between the life I imagined and the way it actually felt. It was subtle, easy to ignore. But once the question existed, it did not disappear. By the time I turned 34, my life looked exactly the way I had once described it to myself. Corner office. Not huge, but high enough to see the river bend through downtown. A team of 6 reporting to me. A salary that would have sounded ridiculous to the kid who used to count quarters for gas money. The condo came with clean lines and quiet neighbors. Stainless steel appliances. A balcony I rarely used. I furnished it carefully, like I was staging a model home. Neutral tones. Framed abstract art. A couch that looked expensive but never quite felt broken in. From the outside, it was textbook success. I dated here and there, but nothing lasted. Most of the women I met were in the same orbit. Ambitious. Scheduled. Conversations that revolved around career trajectories and future investments. There was nothing wrong with them. Nothing wrong with me either. But I started noticing that I felt more relief than excitement when things ended. At work, I became the steady one. The reliable one. The guy who never panicked. I built a reputation on control. I liked that people trusted me with high-pressure situations. It fed the identity I had been constructing since college. Still, small cracks kept appearing. One night, after a company dinner celebrating a record quarter, I came home, loosened my collar, and stood in the dark living room without turning on the lights. The city glowed outside the windows. It looked impressive, alive. Inside, it was silent. I remember thinking, this is it. This is what you wanted. And then another thought followed, quieter but sharper. Then why does it feel like something is missing? I tried to name it. Adventure? Love? Simplicity? Nothing fit exactly. It was more like I was slightly out of phase with my own life. Like I had rehearsed the role so long that I forgot to ask whether I still wanted it. The routines that once felt disciplined now felt automatic. Wake up, gym, office, meetings, emails, performance reviews, drinks on Fridays. Repeat. I was functioning perfectly, thriving technically. But there were moments, usually late at night, when I caught myself wondering who I would be if I had not followed the plan so closely. And that thought began to scare me more than failure ever had. The defining moment did not look dramatic from the outside. It came wrapped in congratulations. I was 36 when they offered me the role of managing director. It was the position I used to circle on org charts when I first joined the firm. The one I told myself would mean I had truly arrived. The meeting was brief. A handshake, a firm smile, numbers discussed in a calm, almost casual tone. The compensation increase was significant. The title even more so. 10 years earlier, I would have walked out of that room feeling 10 feet tall. Instead, I felt strangely still. I remember riding the elevator down alone, staring at my reflection in the mirrored wall. Same suit, same controlled posture. But something in my eyes looked distant, like I was watching someone else get promoted. I told myself the excitement would hit later. It did not. That evening, a few colleagues insisted on drinks. They toasted my discipline, my leadership, my clear trajectory. One of them said I had always known exactly where I was headed. I smiled and nodded. But inside, I felt an unsettling truth forming. I had known where I was headed. I just was not sure I still wanted to be there. The next morning, I woke up before my alarm, heart pounding like I had overslept. For a second, I thought I was anxious about the new responsibilities. That would have made sense. But it was not anxiety. It was emptiness. I sat on the edge of my bed and realized something I had been avoiding for years. The goals that once felt electric now felt inherited. Like they belonged to the 22-year-old version of me who was desperate to prove he was not small. I had built a life to outrun a fear. And now the fear was gone. But the structure remained. Later that week, I found an old notebook while cleaning out a drawer. It was one of those legal pads from college, filled with neat, ambitious bullet points. Income targets, titles, timelines. I flipped through the pages slowly. Every milestone was either checked off or crossed out. There was no space left on the page. And that was when it hit me. I had achieved the dream. Completely. And for the first time, I had no idea what came next. After the promotion, I started noticing myself in strange moments. In reflective surfaces. In the dark window of my office at night. In the polished steel doors of the elevator. I looked successful. Tailored suits. Subtle watch. Confident posture. The kind of man who knew how to run a room without raising his voice. But I started asking myself a question I had never considered before. If I met this man at 22, would I want to become him? The answer did not come quickly. I began paying attention to what actually energized me during the day. It was not the high-level strategy meetings, not the quarterly targets, not even the big negotiations. It was the one-on-one conversations with junior analysts, the mentoring, the parts where I could step away from performance metrics and talk about uncertainty, about career paths that did not have to be straight lines. I caught myself telling one of them, "You do not have to rush into the version of success everyone else expects." The words surprised me as soon as I said them. Because I had rushed. I rushed into certainty, rushed into structure, rushed into proving something I am not even sure anyone was asking for anymore. One Saturday afternoon, I took the train out to the lake just to clear my head. It was early spring, wind cutting across the water, families walking dogs, kids throwing stones into the gray waves. I sat on a bench and tried to remember what I used to enjoy before everything became about optimization. I used to draw. Nothing professional. Just sketches and notebooks. I used to write short stories in high school. I almost minored in literature before deciding it was impractical. When did practicality become the only measure? That afternoon, I felt something close to grief. Not for a failed life. For a successful one that no longer fit. It dawned on me that I had not failed to achieve my dream. I had outgrown it. The person who built that dream was driven by urgency. by fear of being ordinary, by a need to escape. The man sitting on that bench was not afraid of small-town Ohio anymore. He was not afraid of being overlooked. He was afraid of staying frozen in a version of himself that had already done its job. And once I admitted that, quietly, to myself, I knew the harder part was coming. Because acknowledging you have outgrown your dream is one thing. Deciding what to do about it is another. The defining moment came on a Tuesday afternoon, and it was almost accidental. One of the analysts on my team, a 24-year-old named Marcus, knocked on my office door. He looked nervous, not about numbers, about his life. He told me he had been offered a role at a nonprofit. Lower pay, less prestige, more uncertainty. He said he felt stupid for even considering it. His parents thought he would be throwing away momentum. His friends told him to stick it out at least 5 more years. He looked at me like I was the authority on ambition. What would you do? He asked. For a second, I almost gave him the standard answer. The safe one. Stay the course. Build your foundation. Optimize first, pivot later. Instead, I hesitated. I saw myself at his age. So sure that there was only one version of forward. So convinced that deviation meant weakness. I leaned back in my chair and heard myself say something unexpected. I would ask whether the life you are building still belongs to you. He blinked. I told him that the most dangerous thing was not failure. It was succeeding at something you no longer wanted. The words hung between us. He nodded slowly, thanked me, and left. But I stayed there, staring at the closed door, realizing I had just said out loud what I had been circling internally for months. That evening, I did not go straight home. I walked. No headphones. No calls. Just the sound of traffic and my own thoughts. I realized something uncomfortable. I had been mentoring younger versions of myself toward a life I was quietly questioning. I had been reinforcing a structure I no longer believed was universal. When I got home, I did not turn on the television. I did not check emails. I sat at the kitchen counter with a blank notebook and wrote a question at the top of the page. If I were not trying to prove anything, what would I choose now? The answer did not come immediately, but for the first time in years, I felt something stir that was not ambition. It was curiosity, and curiosity felt dangerous. Because once you allow yourself to imagine a different life, the current one starts to feel less permanent. That night, I slept lightly, not because I was anxious, but because I knew a decision was approaching. And it would not be about chasing something new. It would be about letting something old go. The twist came from somewhere I did not expect. 2 weeks after that conversation with Marcus, my mother called. She does not call often. We text on holidays, exchange short updates, polite, efficient check-ins. The kind of relationship you maintain when distance has become normal. Her voice sounded smaller than usual. She told me my father was thinking about selling the hardware store. That store had been his entire identity for more than 30 years. The same building with creaky wooden floors and a bell that chimed every time the door opened. The place I ran from. I felt something tighten in my chest. She said business had slowed. Big chains had moved in. He was tired. Then she added something that surprised me. He thought you might have advice. Advice. The irony was not lost on me. For years, I avoided conversations about the store because I did not want to feel guilty for leaving. I framed my departure as ambition, as growth, as necessary. Now the place I escaped was fading without me. That weekend, I drove back to Ohio for the first time in over a year. The town looked smaller than I remembered. Or maybe I was finally seeing it without the urgency to get away. When I walked into the store, the bell chimed exactly the same way it always had. My father stood behind the counter, older than I expected. Slower, but still steady. We talked numbers at first. Inventory. Margins. Foot traffic. I slipped easily into analysis mode. It felt familiar. But then he said something that shifted everything. I never wanted you to feel trapped here. I looked up at him. He told me he saw how restless I was at 22. How I would stare at the highway like it was calling my name. He said he was proud I left. Proud. That word hit harder than any promotion ever had. For so long, I thought I was running from expectation. What if I had been running from my own projection of it? We stood there in the quiet store, shelves half-stocked, dust floating in late afternoon light. And for the first time, I did not see it as a symbol of limitation. I saw it as something real, imperfect, human, something built slowly. On the drive back to Chicago, I realized the version of success I chased was partly a reaction, a way to prove I was not stuck. But no one had been holding me in place. The pressure was mostly self-imposed. That realization did not mean I wanted to take over the store. It did not mean I regretted leaving. But it cracked something open. If my life had been shaped by assumptions that were never fully true, what else was I holding on to out of habit? The skyline appeared again as I approached the city. For the first time, it did not feel like a trophy. It felt like a choice. And choices can be changed. I did not quit the next day. That would have been dramatic, emotional, reckless. Instead, I did something quieter. I stopped pretending. For months, I had been moving through my days like a man already halfway out the door, but still too disciplined to admit it. After the trip home, that half-feeling became clearer. I was not burned out. I was not ungrateful. I was complete. The dream I built in my 20s had served its purpose. It got me out. It shaped me. It proved I could build something from nothing. But it was built for a different version of me. I started asking myself practical questions. If money were no longer the primary driver, what mattered? If status stopped being fuel, what was left? The answer kept circling back to one word: impact. Not in a flashy, keynote speaker way. Not in a billionaire foundation way. Something smaller. More direct. I found myself thinking about mentorship again. About how alive I felt in conversations where ambition was not the only metric. One evening, I drafted a proposal to shift into an internal leadership development role within the firm. Lower pay, less visibility, more direct involvement with people instead of numbers. The old version of me would have called it a step down. This version saw it as alignment. When I brought the idea to the senior partners, they were confused. One of them asked if I was feeling overwhelmed. Another reminded me how rare my current position was at my age. I listened. Calm. Clear. For the first time in my career, I was not negotiating upward. I was negotiating inward. The strangest part was how peaceful I felt explaining it. No defensiveness. No need to justify. Just honesty. I told them I had achieved what I set out to achieve. That I was proud of it. But that I wanted the next chapter to look different. Walking out of that meeting, I expected regret. Instead, I felt lighter. Not because I was abandoning success, but because I was redefining it on my own terms. That night, standing in my kitchen again, the skyline still glowing outside, I noticed something had shifted. The view no longer felt like a scoreboard. It felt like a backdrop. And for the first time, I did not feel trapped by the life I had built. I felt free to reshape it. The final realization was simple, but it took me 15 years to understand. Outgrowing a dream is not betrayal. It is evolution. And evolution does not erase who you were. It proves you kept becoming. The real ending did not come with applause. It came on a quiet Sunday morning. A few months after shifting roles at the firm, I found myself back on the balcony I had barely used before. Coffee in hand. No urgent emails waiting. No performance metrics flashing in the back of my mind. The skyline was still there. The same steel and glass. The same movement below. But I was different. The new role paid less. It came with fewer external markers of importance. Some colleagues quietly assumed I had stalled. A few probably thought I had lost my edge. Surprisingly, that no longer bothered me. My days now revolve around conversations instead of transactions. I spend time helping younger analysts map paths that actually fit them, not just impress others. I ask harder questions. I encourage detours when they make sense. And every time someone says, "I did not realize I had options," I feel something solid settle inside me. Not pride. Meaning. I have not sold the condo. I have not moved back to Ohio. I did not burn down the life I built. I simply stopped treating it like a monument. It is a chapter. That is the part one did not understand at 22. I thought dreams were destinations. Fixed endpoints you either reached or failed to reach. I did not realize they were seasonal. The version of me who stared at highways in southern Ohio needed a bold, structured, ambitious dream. He needed distance. He needed proof. The man standing here now does not need to outrun anything. He needs alignment. Sometimes I think about that legal pad from college, the one filled with neat bullet points and measurable milestones. I used to believe that once I checked every box, I would feel complete. Instead, completion gave me permission to evolve. There is something unexpectedly peaceful about admitting you have outgrown a dream. It is not dramatic. It is not tragic. It does not erase the work you did or the discipline you built. It simply acknowledges that growth changes the shape of success. If you had asked me at 22 what failure looked like, I would have said it meant settling for less than my ambition. Now I see it differently. Failure would have been clinging to an old version of success out of habit. Standing here, Watching the city wake up, I do not feel like I abandoned my dream. I feel like I honored it. It carried me as far as it was meant to. And now, for the first time in years, I am not chasing a fixed image of who I should become. I am curious about who I might become next.